This episode of the Leap Forward podcast is brought to you by Bridge LT, leaders in conversational learning and innovation. Through AI role plays, technical simulators, and comprehensive training programs, Bridge LT is revolutionizing the future of corporate and enterprise education.
Today on Leap Forward, we're thrilled to welcome Daksh Gupta, a transformative leader who reshaped the automotive landscape at Marshall Motor Group, driving impressive growth and innovation. Now, as CEO of Hughes Gray, the UK's largest independent builders merchant, Daksh shares valuable insights on leadership, technology, and team development. Join us as we explore his remarkable journey across two dynamic industries and his vision for the future.
Well, welcome to another edition of the Bridge Learning Technology Leap Forward podcast series. I'm absolutely delighted today to be joined by Daksh Gupta. Daksh is the Group CEO of Hughes Gray. And for those of you that don't know that name, they are the UK's largest independent builders merchant. We'll ask Daksh to kind of just tell us how large they are in a minute. Daksh, thank you very much for joining us today. It's really great to have you. You've got such an incredible career. Obviously, Vice President of the IMI, Board Advisor to Ford of Europe, alongside your role at Hughes Gray. You're the former CEO of Marshall. You took it to IPO and then through to its acquisition by Constellation. You do a lot in philanthropy as well with the Ben Automotive charity, and I believe you were also automotive management industry's youngest ever Hall of Fame inductee. So welcome. And really would love, first of all, just to kind of hear a little bit more about your career journey to date.
Well, do you want me to start? So I quite like the young bit there, Justin, on the youngest Hall of Fame. Yeah, I think I was 51 or something, but it's only 53, so it wasn't too long ago. So yeah, I mean, look, just spent last 31 years in automotive. Fantastic industry, absolutely loved it. Spent the previous 15 and a bit years with Marshall. Joined there as CEO in 2008, so I was kind of quite young, 37 years old. Grew that company quite aggressively in the first sort of 5-6 years to over $1 billion in sales. Privately owned, and with a lot of private companies, obviously the challenge is how do you get funding to continue to grow the business? And we looked at different options, but we took the company public we started that process in 2013, and then we successfully, late 2013, and sort of spent 2014 understanding how the process worked, looking at different investment banks, sort of beauty pros of different advisors, and then we successfully IPO'd in early 2015. We had a strategy to sort of double the turnover and treble the profit in 5 years, but we essentially did that in a year because we did some fairly aggressive M&A activity. So yeah, very, very busy. I mean, during my tenure there, we bought and sold 224 businesses, did 84 transactions. So we were doing a deal sort of every 57 days. So very, very busy. And then the company got to 2 billion, 3 billion, 4 billion. And as you said, we were acquired by Constellation Automotive in 2022, May 2022, the deal was approved.
And then obviously you had probably the world at your feet somewhat. What led you then to what next?
So obviously when the takeover went, I thought, having had a long time at Marshall, I think the reality is when you're running a public company and then you're going to go back to being private, it's never going to be the same. You're being subsumed by a much bigger entity in Constellation. So the reality is, you're no longer sort of, a number one, so to speak, in a business. You're sort of a divisional CEO all of a sudden. So, operating somebody else's strategy and another company's strategy, that's fine. That's what happens. That's what, listen, that's what I did for 15 years is acquire companies. So, I just kind of felt that it was the right time for me to make a decision to pursue other things. Then had a period of garden leave, had lots and lots of phone calls during that period, lots of other dealer groups talking to me. Offered a few roles running some of the other big groups that are out there, but I kind of felt I just fancied a change. I mean, it's as what else could you realistically do in the industry that was going to challenge you? You're never going to be able to do. I think it'd be very difficult for somebody to go and do what we achieved at Marshall again. I think, Robert Forrester's done an amazing job at Virtue, but actually how many people have really built a group of that sort of scale? Not many. The Vardy organisation back in or Sir Peter Vardy back in the day, Tony Bramall, but maybe Trevor Finn at Pendragon, but not many people have sort of done that. So it'd be very difficult to repeat because of the consolidation there. So then started getting, to be honest, I hadn't really sort of considered opportunities outside the industry. And then I started getting phone calls from different headhunters saying, look, the skill set's very transferable. It's multi-site. You've got experience of taking a company public. You've got experience of running scaled organizations, culture, people, strategy. Do you fancy doing something, in an adjacent sector? And, I was probably, I think I was offered 4 or 5 different roles. And actually, I really, really was impressed with Blackstone, who are the people who sponsor Hughes Gray. This is a business that's gone through massive, massive, massive growth. More impressive than what we did at Marshall. Back in 2018, this was a business that was 181 million in revenue, then doubled up in size to about 350 million. And then did a huge acquisition in 2021, which wasn't approved until the 1st of January 2022. And that took it to 1.624 billion. And whilst you could argue, well, Marshall was sort of heading towards 4 billion, this is 1.62 billion. Is it smaller? No, it's not. It's actually much bigger. You've got 330 locations here versus 188 at Marshall. And the reason why the revenue is distorted is clearly the average item that you would have sold in an automotive business, the average sell is much higher, whereas here our average transaction value is around £78. So you can see the number of transactions we do here is much bigger. It's a lot more complex, different supplier relationships. So we've got 16 different operating companies. So it's a very different business, but also the parallels are very, very similar. Fast growth, backed by a phenomenal alternative investment manager in Blackstone. They are the best in the world, and they've been brilliant. Can't speak highly enough about them. It was kind of really attracted me was the parallels and the things that I felt I could help them do to improve their business in terms of the trajectory that they've gone on.
Yeah, I think we'll come back to that because I think I'd love to dig more into those parallels as this conversation progresses. But obviously, I suppose in a sense, you've got this, I suppose, quite unique perspective on the automotive sector itself now. You've sort of got somewhat of a foot sort of still remaining in, as it were, through your various kind of roles. You've got obviously this vast kind of experience to date. Tell me a little bit about sort of through that lens, I suppose, the challenges that you see the industry facing right now.
Yeah, maybe it's a foot and a hand with the stuff I've been doing with Ford and obviously with the R&I, so maybe a little bit. And I don't think that will ever change. I think it would be a shame to walk away from 31 years in the sector with the relationships I've got with the brilliant people who I consider as friends there for many, many years. I think that would be quite hard for me to have stepped away from fully. I'm absolutely committed to what I'm doing with Hughes Gray, but of course, obviously keep a keen, watchful interest in terms of what's going on in the sector. I think the sector's got lots of challenges in the short to medium term, particularly with what's going on in the UK with the move to electrification, the regulation that's been implemented for this year with ZEV mandate is proving to be very, very challenging for lots of motor manufacturers. It's obviously having a massive impact on the retail networks because, of course, they're being targeted very aggressively towards hitting those key objectives that the OEMs have been set by the government. And if they don't hit those objectives, of course, the fines are extremely penal. So, I think what you're going to see is it is going to be sort of survival of the fittest, I think, really, from an OEM perspective over the next sort of 3 to 5 years, because unless you hit those targets, you're in serious trouble. And so I think that also then drives the behavior, because if you're trying to hit 22% of your sales to be electric vehicles, you will then put very aggressive terms out there, because reputationally, you don't want to be on the list of companies that is fined for not hitting the targets. Okay. Secondly, financially, it's very penal. If you're a manufacturer that, has to sell 100,000 or registers 100,000 cars, and you've got a target of 22,000 of those vehicles being battery electric vehicles, if you miss, do the numbers. If you miss by 1,000 units at 15 grand, that's a big number. So So that's a big issue for OEMs, financially and reputationally. And of course, that target just keeps moving up and up and up all the way through till 2030. So there's a lot of pressure to do that. Also, that's driving, we're seeing extremely competitive deals in the marketplace. I mean, if you look at, I look at select car leasing as a good benchmark on what sort of tactical activities out there. I mean, electric vehicles are cheap. I mean, there are some phenomenal deals. And I think come the year end in November, December, there'll be some incredible deals because manufacturers will not want to have fines for not hitting the target. So I think there'll be some really, really good deals out there. That obviously is also putting pressure because the attractiveness of a new car versus a used car, you're better off going for a new car because the incentives are so strong. But of course, what that's done then is put pressure on residual values for used, which of course a lot of people are feeling the pain for last year and this year. So profitability is clearly coming under pressure. You are also then seeing potentially after sales come under pressure as well as more EVs come through, and there's clearly less maintenance work to do there as well. So I think in the short to medium term, a lot of pressure for the retail networks and the OEMs. And it is going to be survival of the fittest. And one of the things I said 4 or 5 years ago is I think you're going to see the emergence of 4 or 5 super groups. And that's exactly what we've seen when you look at the consolidation that's happened in the UK in the last 2 years.
And obviously you painted a really interesting picture there, and challenges being the right word. But what are the levers? What are the opportunities that the sector has to sort of circumnavigate, overcome those challenges?
I think, the great thing I love about automotive is, it's run by entrepreneurs, and they're very, very, they're very good at, dealing with challenges, adapting, there's lots of examples, the sector's gone through, rip off Britain as a challenge, in terms of when people were importing cars from Europe. They've gone through financial crisis, they've gone through COVID, they've gone through, Kazoo's going to take the world over. They're very, very, very adaptable. I have a huge amount of respect for people in the automotive sector because these guys are, they're entrepreneurs at heart, and they're very, very successful business people, and they have skill sets that are very transferable, as obviously I'm finding out. And I think for me, we sometimes do the automotive industry a bit of a disservice in terms of the quality of people that are in there, because I can tell you the quality of people are excellent. They are really strong, all-rounded commercial entrepreneurs, and they're very, very good at running their businesses. So I think I do think individuals will find ways to adapt their business models. So you're seeing more people get better at used cars. So because obviously they've realised that you could be under pressure in after sales as the vehicle park moves towards electric vehicles. So what you're seeing is a much better retention of used car vehicles using strategies like PCP to retain those customers, be that second PCP, third HP agreement through the cycle of ownership of a customer, be that selling after sales service plans. But generally, when you look at, for example, used cars, the ratio that retailers sell now of new to used vehicles, I mean, typically, in the old days, 15, 20 years ago, it would be like 1 to 1. You'd sell one new car for one every used. Now, you look at the fantastic performances some of the groups do. The Arnold Clarks of this world have always been like 3, 4 used cars to 1, and they're just exceptionally good used car retailers. I think people have woken up to that in recent years because the pandemic's probably forced them to really take action. And I think the really well-run retailers have been doing that anyway. So I think people will adapt. I think they will look at what are the new income streams can you get for the model, and also the OEMs will adapt the network sizes as well. So you've seen a shrinking of network sizes that's been going on for many, many years, and I think that will continue as well.
And as someone who's obviously led an organization through enormous growth during a time where there's been an immense revolution in terms of the use of and adoption of the internet and technology, how as a leader do you think about embracing technology to improve efficiency and productivity?
One of the things that's great with the company I work with now is being backed by Blackstone. I mean, they are a phenomenal organization. They're the biggest investors of AI in the world. And, one of the appeals for me to coming here is what I could learn around, other technologies, other ways of doing business, because actually the skill sets are broadly transferable, but also you always learn something new about how different things work. And so, the ability to have that huge growth of knowledge is fantastic, which you wouldn't have necessarily got if you'd stayed doing something else in automotive. So it would have been kind of more of the same, really. But when I look at AI, AI is going to revolutionize the way that we all work. There's no doubt about that. And I think, dismiss it at your peril. And some people, are not necessarily embracing it. They're a bit anxious. They're not aware of it. But if you do not embrace AI, your competitors will use this to hurt you. They really will, because they'll be able to operate with lower cost, more efficient organizations. And I think that's in any sector and every sector, because this technology is here now. It's coming. It's getting more and more clever. Look at ChatGPT. I think, the ChatGPT 2, had an IQ of around 228, which is phenomenal. They think, the next iteration of ChatGPT will have an IQ of 10,000. I mean, it is really scary stuff, really, really scary stuff. But AI can be used in a way to drive efficiencies in organizations that you wouldn't believe. Some of the technology is quite scary as to where this is all going to kind of land, really. But I think that's just one example in particular that I think is really relevant right now in terms of what's going on. But then again, there's lots of technology that you can utilize in your business every single day in terms of how you manage inquiries, how you do chat on your website, how you take photographs. It can be used everywhere and anywhere. And as I said, if you're not using technology or utilizing this new technology, your competitors will use it to kill you, quite frankly, and that will happen. So I would encourage people to really look at how can they revolutionize their business from this technology.
And it's really interesting. You talked about sort of one of the attractions of your current role and the backing of Blackstone being around learning. Let's just talk about sort of learning in the wider context of the industry. What sort of skills gaps do you see across the industry, and how do we best close them?
I think the industry, from a learning perspective, I think it has got better. There's no doubt. But I still think there's the biggest issue with the industry is attraction. How is it getting new blood to the industry? Which is a real shame, because it's a fantastic industry. That might seem odd as I've just left the industry, not fully, still got my arm and my foot in there. But actually, I think it is a great industry, but, the industry's got to do a better job of promoting itself. And, it's ironic that, having been in the industry for 31 years, I've heard that a lot over that 30-year period, is we've got to do a better job of attracting people. So I think it starts with attraction first. And then when you've got people, and I think the industry's got better at doing attracting diversity. If you look at some of the, sort of momentum that the sector has really looked at in terms of diversity, that's been brilliant, because what it's done is it's attracted new talent to the industry that historically wouldn't have necessarily looked at the industry, because it's been perceived as male dominated. And again, it's interesting, that's one of the things that, in this sector, you've got exactly the same issue. It's very male dominated. In fact, it's like going back 20 years in this sector. I mean, maybe longer. So one of the things that I think I can bring to my business here is promote diversity, so we can start to attract a different kind of talent here, because it's not being done in the way that I think we could do it to attract a new audience. So I think there's a whole piece on attraction. I think the industry's definitely done a much better job in terms of diversity within automotive. And then I think in terms of around how do we retain and educate these people to be the best that they possibly can be. And I think that does come down to training. It comes down to the recruitment process, how that person's had induction. How do we train that person to do their job the best that they can be? What technologies can you be using, be that e-learning, be that classroom training? There's a whole host of tools that you can deploy there. And then how they then accelerate their career aspirations, if that's something that they wish to do.
And when you're leading an organization, how do you sort of look at disseminating that sort of across the organization?
So in terms of training specifically, so in terms of training, I think it's kind of questioning. I've got two different examples there. So if you look at a mature business like Marshall, we actually have our own internal training academy. So there, it's a bit easier because you've got it in-house and you've got it on tap. But equally, where you've got specialist training, we will outsource that. Also, a lot of the OEMs are excellent. A lot of them, you know, a lot of the brands have their own training academies. So BMW have their own academy, Volkswagen have their own academy, and so on. So you would always use your internal training to sort of supplement what the OEMs were doing. A lot of the OEM stuff tended to be quite technical training. Whereas what we were trying to do internally would be more skills training and more training around specifically, skills to how to run and manage businesses in particular. So that's how we did it here. We're very much, because of the growth that the organisation's gone through, we're very much still formulating our strategy around that. In fact, we're just launching a lot of this stuff with a sort of Hughes Gray Academy now, but it's very, very much early days. But that's because the business has grown so rapidly.
And when you think about sort of that learning experience, I suppose, in a sense, what are some of the things that you feel are really critical to get right? Because the kind of talent of today, are just ubiquitous in terms of their use of mobile phones and so forth, right? So how do we make sure that what we're creating is fit for purpose?
Yeah, I think that the workforce has changed, even in the last few years because of COVID. So anything that you can do to make it simple, easy, fast, quick. I have an extremely busy diary schedule. So what I tend to do is anything that I can do that I can listen. So, for example, it's 1:00 now, and later on I've got to head into London for a dinner. But I like listening to the train. When I'm on the train, I like listening to podcasts, or if there's just stuff I need to take on board. Then that's one way I like to learn, particularly in the evening, because if I'm coming back out of London, you're not going to ring anyone. I probably won't do it so much on the way in because I'll make my phone calls, but on the way out, that's time that you can utilise to sort of listen to things, and I find that quite useful, really, to sort of try and educate yourself or learn something new. So I think that's just one example of how you've got to look at what learning strategies can you put in place to suit those individuals. Some people like e-learning, some people like classroom learning. So it's just sort of what works for that individual person, really.
And you've talked about AI, and you've talked there just about sort of e-learning and online and using technology to scale and deal with a fast-growing organisation. When you sort of think about the sort of the skills of today, I was having a conversation with one of your colleagues recently, and they were talking about new roles in cybersecurity that didn't really sort of exist in the same way that they do today.
Yeah.
How do you think about sort of those you talked about AI. How do you take something like AI or cybersecurity? How do you embed that inside your org?
Yeah, I mean, we have, so from a governance perspective, we now have a IT steering committee. So we have, various key stakeholders from across the business. So people from finance, from ops, from myself, from IT, IT is always a precious resource in every organization. I never see every organization wants more IT work doing, and it's always limited bandwidth that function has. So for me, it's about allocating and deploying where resource can get biggest bang for buck, because everybody wants IT resource, and they're always screaming at the most heads of IT in organizations always getting, it's interesting talking to our head of IT here. I said, how do you allocate work? And he said, he who shouts loudest or who goes round the back door, and that happens a lot in organizations. So I said, well, that's not really fair on you, because it should be actually down to the business to allocate where to deploy that limited resource. So in terms of working out where to invest, we would basically look at, job by job, item by item, what is the potential value that a particular project can bring. And some of it is not necessarily about delivering hard-nosed profitability. It's also looking at, okay, what can drive efficiency in the organization, what can improve customer satisfaction, what can improve colleague satisfaction, and then it's a case of prioritizing which of those is more pressing at a particular point in time. So that's how we typically would allocate resource. But certainly, it is something that you do have to have a decent governance on, otherwise it can just get out of control. And also, if you haven't got decent governance on it, how do you know what work is coming downstream as well for the organization and manage the expectations internally?
You talked about sort of attracting talent into the industry, and I think there's probably a parallel we can talk about with the automotive sector and your current role in a minute. But when you think about young people entering work and entering either industry, frankly, what are the kind of really key characteristics and competencies you think they need to have to succeed today?
I mean, I can only speak for myself. I mean, I was a very curious person. I was always curious, why does something do that? So don't be scared to ask why. And actually, I was very fortunate. I probably think this is general about most managers. I think most managers generally, I would say 99% of them, want to help people. And I mean, if ever I had a question to ask a manager, I never ever experienced a situation where nobody would tell me the answer. No one would have said, "Oh, you don't need to know that," or no one would ever tell me, "Why do you want to know that?" It's none of your business. I think most people, unless it was something confidential, but then you wouldn't ask that anyway. But I always found myself to be a very curious person, and I like to learn. And I think that just made me better at what I did. And ultimately, that's got to be a good thing, right? So I think young people, I would say, is be curious, don't be scared to ask. Most of your managers will genuinely want to help you. I'm almost certain of that. Because that's why they probably wanted to take a management position in the first place. They wanted to do better themselves, and they wanted to help other people. And also, if you're in a management position, the reality is, if you're in a management position, you cannot be successful unless you help others be successful. Because if you're managing, a department of 10 people, if you've got one or two that let you down in that department, the department doesn't hit plan. If you don't hit plan, you don't earn bonus. Simple. As how it works in 99% of the companies. So in reality, part of your job as a manager is make people as good as they can be. You do that by helping them deal with knowledge gaps and making them better day by day. So I would say to young people, be curious. Don't be scared to ask why. Don't be scared to ask questions. And don't be scared to be ambitious. You don't see, I don't see enough young people sticking their hands up saying, I want to develop. Now, my philosophy on, promotions, it's got to be not just because you've been here the longest, it's got to be, the best candidate gets the role. And it shouldn't be based on, anything else other than the best candidate gets the job. So for me, unless you actually know somebody's got the ambition to want to develop and grow, how can you invest in that person? How can you help them be better than they are? How can you put them on training courses that are going to develop them? How can you put them on, wait or deal with any knowledge gaps they've got? So for me personally, management don't know all the answers. You've got to almost help them get there. And I think the biggest thing that young people can do is, be prepared to put their hands up for stuff, volunteer for stuff. I look for attitude in a lot of people more than anything else. What's that person's attitude? Is that person moan and groan and not get anything done, or is it somebody who genuinely does get things done and wants to have that drive to deliver?
And how important is it, do you think, to be a mentor or to be mentored yourself?
I think you can always learn. I mean, I've been so lucky, Justin. I really, really have. I've been so lucky. I've worked with some amazing leaders. I really have. I mean, if I think about, Richard Parry Jones, my former chairman. I mean, Richard Parry Jones was a legend in the worldwide automotive industry. So he was my chairman. Sadly we lost him, too early, but he was a fantastic guy, and I learned so much from him. And that's just one example. Sir Michael Marshall was my boss at Marshall. You learn different things around, his values and why they were important, and he really drilled into me the importance of values and how they embedded an organization. Whether you got someone like Alan Cook, who's on the ex chief executive of Cobham PLC, WS Atkins, HS2, an amazing guy. Sarah Sillers, who was on our board, Alan Ferguson, Peter Johnson, Graham Potts. I mean, look, I've been so lucky. You work with some amazing people, and you learn stuff. So Ralph Robbins was on our board, the chief executive of Rolls Royce. I mean, Peter Harvey, ex Barclays. I mean, what you do is you pick up little things from all of them that they do, or things that they say, or and you think, yeah, that makes a lot of sense, and you take that on board. So having good mentors is a really good thing, I would say, and you're always learning. I have a mentor here. I'm very, very lucky. I've got Jean-Jacques Lafont, who is somebody who's on our board that I speak to on a regular basis. And this is the guy that built, Alliance Automotive Group, one of the biggest parts distributions companies in the world, So, if I've got things I want to talk about, I just say, oh, what do you think to this, JJ? So having people that you can talk to, and I think sometimes when they're outside the organisation, I mean, my chairman here, Terry, is fantastically supportive, but sometimes having somebody outside the organisation who's almost a bit neutral is really good. So I believe in surrounding yourself with decent mentors, people you can talk to. And actually, in a bizarre way, if I think about my team that I work with now, I've got a brilliant relationship. Whilst there is a kind of different relationship there, actually, I tend to work quite closely with my team. So, we sort of kick ideas around, and they may not sort of be in the same sort of structure, but actually it is quite useful because you just want people to talk to. So I would encourage people find mentors, and it's a good thing. You're always learning, always.
Yeah. And obviously you're a mentor and advisor yourself, and would love just to ask you a little bit about, without betraying any obviously confidence there at all, whether it's your hand or your foot with Ford of Europe. But describe that role, and what sort of advice kind of are you giving them at the moment?
Well, the Ford thing's quite an interesting one, because actually Ford first approached me when I was on garden leave back in must have been January. That might have been late 2021, 22 when I first went on garden leave. So, and obviously couldn't do anything because I was on garden leave. But I spoke to the team. They're talking about their distribution around agency, and could I help them with sort of some of my retail experience, and working with the team, John Williams, who sort of heads up Europe, and Martin Sander, who was there at the time, who's now worldwide sales and marketing director for Volkswagen Group, literally worldwide. I mean, what a huge job he's got, as is John Williams. So they, met those guys in Cologne. They said, could I help? And I thought, okay, this will be quite interesting. I never ever thought I would ever go, on the other side, and I said, okay, I'm not sure about this, but I thought, it's a great experience to learn, because of the individuals who I have a huge amount of respect for. I thought that would be really, really good. And, just spoke to them. And then when my garden leave period finished sort of last year, went over them to Cologne and Amsterdam in particular, which is where the pilot market was for agency, and worked really, really closely with the team there, who were fantastic. And it is a bit different, because when you're doing that kind of role, or an advisory role, I did quite a bit of advice, because originally I was thinking, should I go and do advisory non-exec role, and lots and lots of opportunities. I was working with a tech company. I was working with some other UK-based tech companies that I can't talk about, but I could have really had it carved out a really, really interesting career doing that. But to be honest with you, I'm too young. It's like I was 51 when the transaction was announced at Marshall. In fact, it might have been 50. I was 50. I think 50. And I enjoy work. Work's not work. It's a privilege to lead. It's a privilege to lead an organisation such as this or Marshall, because you work with fantastic people. So, I think the difference is, though, when you're doing advisory or mentoring or non-exec roles, it is different, because you don't run the business. And it's interesting. Can't say too much, but I might be switching shortly on something. And you have to respect that there are CEOs. There is a CEO in a business, and you have to respect they run the business. You don't. And as long as you go into that knowing that you don't run the business, and you are respectful, just as I wouldn't want a non-exec telling me what to do. Yes, help, advise, coach, etc. And in some ways, I guess I'm in a good position, because I know what that role is supposed to be and what it's not. But at the end of the day, when it's all said and done, you can give your thoughts, you can give your inputs. It's up to the management to decide whether they want to take that advice. And you have to respect their decision. You might not agree with it, but they ultimately are there. Having you there to pass on your experiences, to help them make less mistakes because of the experiences that you've had. And apply it to their organisation, but ultimately it's down to them to run their businesses. So it is different. It is very different. And if I'm honest, it was one of the reasons why. It was one of the influencing decisions where I thought, okay, nah, I'm too young. I'm too young to hang my boots up, and do all of this advisory stuff. And I just felt it was too early for me to give up an executive career, which is why I've done what I'm doing now. And I think from a personal perspective, I'm doing it because I want to do it, not because I have to do it, which is a nice position to be in. And also I think there's a nice thing is when you want to do it, it's a lot more enjoyable. Does that make sense?
100%. I think there's a famous Warren Buffett quote there somewhere about that, but agreed completely. Makes sense. And you've obviously got sort of two other roles that you're doing at the moment. One is obviously very important to you, the Ben Automotive charity, and then your role at a wider kind of industry level with the IMI. How do you kind of adapt, yourself to help those organizations realize the opportunities and overcome the challenges they face?
Well, I actually just stepped off Ben quite recently, actually. So, Justin,
Okay.
so and that was because again, you don't want to be spread too thin. And also I've been on the Ben board for coming up to 11 years, and I think normally sort of director terms would typically be 3 years, and it would be quite sort of good corporate governance that you'd have 3 years, then 6, and then it will be by exception you'd go to 9, and then you go +1, +1, and Steve Nash, who I love to bits, who's the chairman there, kept saying, "Oh, please, you've got great experience," and so and actually it just kind of felt, switching industries, it was the right thing to do, and I'm really passionate about Ben. Some of the stuff that we've done with the organisation's been fantastic, and some of the stuff that I did in terms of working with the team there in terms of industry leader challenge, be that dealers backing Ben. We raised millions of pounds for the organisation. I'm really, really proud to have been associated with them and proud of the work that I did there, and really proud of the organisation in terms of the work they do for the wider industry. So I stepped down relatively recently in the last since I took up my role here. But yeah, no, I mean, it kind of felt the right time, having been there just under 11 years, really. So,
and the IMI itself.
Oh, sorry, the IMI. Yeah, so that's quite interesting because again, improving skills. That's a little bit less heavy lifting, because obviously as one of the vice presidents, it's not kind of on the day-to-day running of the boards. It's more around strategic input, etc. So that's quite light touch, really, in comparison to the stuff I was doing at Ben or the stuff I'm doing anywhere else. But again, meeting with the various vice presidents and meeting with the IMI team, it's around shaping what are the things that can be done to improve skills in the sector. And again, it's a topic that, as I said, I'm quite passionate about in terms of people and the sector. So yeah, great to have the opportunity to participate and give input to that team, really.
I've got a real sense of learning being a constant in your life, and we did touch on this briefly. And I love the points you made around sort of being curious and putting your hand up. But if you were to really think back to kind of a Dash right at the very beginning, what would be the one piece of advice you would give to you entering this industry?
I would say, don't. I mean, there's lots of advice I give. I'd say the biggest thing is don't let anybody say that you can't achieve. Everybody has imposter syndrome to a point. I mean, somebody said to me recently, you must be quite a rare person. And I said, in what respect? I said, well, how many people have run not 1 but 2 billion turnover businesses in 2 separate industries? And I thought, I never really thought of it like that. And then I said, I don't know how many billion-pound companies are. So we Googled how many billion-pound companies are. I was just chatting with this person, and there's less than 250 billion turnover businesses in this country. In fact, I think it's 227. So there's not many billion-pound companies. So to have the privilege to run not only 1 but 2, build one first of all, and then run a second one, it's a huge honor and a huge privilege to be able to do that, because there's not many of those opportunities out there, as we've said. And I think for me, the one thing is, I always keep sort of saying, one day I'm going to get found out, that I'm not very good, and I still believe that today. So, but actually, I would say to people, go and have the confidence to achieve anything that you can, because you can absolutely achieve anything that you want to.
Well, you've done it, and I really appreciate your time today. Thank you, Dash.